Who would like to ask any questions? Oh, straight away, yeah.
What's the risk that that they may actually close this down and then restart on something different yet again?
Who's they?
As in the USS, so, or somebody turn around and say, enough's enough, let's take some monetary value and let's reinvest in.
Yeah, I mean, they can't really do, so USS, yes, they've got the, it's a separate company with the directors that can choose what to do, but there's a lot of stuff that are bound by the rules of the scheme and the articles of association for the company. And really, it's the scheme stakeholders, which are the employers and the unions, or the members as represented by the unions, who will decide on the future of the scheme. Now, what happened a year ago was that Universities UK, there was deadlock between the two sides. Universities UK, so the employers said, we want to close the defined benefit nature of the scheme and move to this defined contribution scheme. Employers said, absolutely not. Unions said absolutely not. Employers had now come round to this idea, but still, at that point, it was unions said absolutely not. There was a casting vote by the chair of the Joint Negotiating Committee that sided with the employers there. So closing the scheme can't really happen without the support of the stakeholders. At the moment, Universities UK, representing the employers, say that they want the scheme to remain open with the current benefits. And they want to see the Joint Expert Panel implemented. They're not prepared to rock the boat to make it happen, is the thing. Hope that's answered the question. Question up at the back, yeah.
So our new VC has written a letter, communication thing, saying essentially he supports the union's position in valuation of the scheme. It kind of goes against his response to the strike in York, but whatever. So what do you think if more VCs can get on board, what the outcome of that would be?
Well, yeah, that's a good question. Our new Vice-Chancellor was chair of what's called the Employers' Pension Forum, which is a discussion forum for the employers to form sort of policy on pensions. And he was in that role up till, and I think through the strike, stepped down soon afterwards. Arguably, he had a role in the move to end defined benefits and move to defined contributions. But you're absolutely right. He's written a statement as of last week saying that he fully supports the branch's work on this and the view on the valuation. So the question is, how many employers, and Sheffield University have a working group which I sit on with Motty Katzman, who's here somewhere. Jo was on it, but now she's, I presume, not. We haven't totally clarified that. Stephen Julius, if he's here. Anyway, and the University of Sheffield have been really pretty strident with their remarks about how little patience they've got for what's going on. But they are on one extreme. There are other institutions. Warwick, I think, is really fed up. In fact, I mean, it's possibly no surprise given that Jane Hutton is there, and Saul Jacker, who's on the Joint Expert Panel, is also at Warwick. It seems to be where universities are well informed, they realise what's going on. Others bury their heads. The overall response is, I think, what they're calling something like indicative support for this option 3. And while they're kind of on board with the Joint Expert Panel and the report there and what needs to happen, they're not prepared to put their money where their mouth is, or I don't know, put something where their something is. It's not money where mouth is, but it's some kind of mix of things. I saw a question here. Is this about the recording?
Yeah, just if you could repeat the question. The only person I can really hear is you.
Sorry. Okay, thank you. Excellent. So a question here first.
So I certainly agree with everything you said about the trustworthiness or lack thereof of USS, and we can do as many valuations as we like. If the methodology is designed to give us a massive deficit, it will always give us that result. My question pertained to what about exploring alternate methods? Like last year there was talk of wage and retirement schemes, collective defined contribution, things that are better than just being told, well, here you go, good luck. But get out of this deadlock of every 3 years, or now every year, here's a valuation that shows, look, it's horrible, getting worse, cut some more.
Yeah, well, I think you talked about not having faith in the valuation. I mean, the first step here is to defend the defined benefit scheme and to get a valuation that has the faith of the people who need to put trust in it. So that's us and employers. And at the moment, we're a long way from that. The Joint Expert Panel's second report is supposed to be a sort of thorough report on how the scheme should be valued and what's appropriate for a scheme of this nature, which is a very different scheme from, say, BHS's pension scheme, where it's based on one employer. It shouldn't be valued in the same way. I gave a talk, I was invited down to give a talk in London, and in a session where Terry Pullinger, who's the Deputy General Secretary of the Communication Workers Union, was also talking. So he represented Royal Mail, so the employees, the postal workers, in a dispute with Royal Mail over their pension scheme, which they solved by going down this kind of route, a collective defined contribution scheme. First thing he said when he started his speech was, if there was any way we could have defended our defined benefit scheme, we would have. And anyone who's got a defined benefit scheme that's still open, you should defend it to the end. He said, in our situation, the setup was such, a single employer, a very different sort of valuation scenario. There was no way we could keep it open. We had to look for alternatives. But he basically said, if you've got an open defined benefit scheme that you can defend, that's what you need to do. And I would agree. And the possibly a year or two ago, there could have been conversations around this kind of thing before we realised the extent of the wrongdoing within USS, and before people were forced to go out on strike for a month. Now it seems inconceivable until we have trust in the valuation. And if there is a valuation that everyone trusts that says there's a problem, then we can talk about progressive solutions perhaps. But while we don't trust the valuation, and while we don't trust the people writing the valuation, I can't see that being on the cards really. Right, there was a question here that I saw, and then I've seen there and there. Anyway, yes, go on, Islam.
So, two questions. So, as a stakeholder, can UCU have a vote of no confidence in the board?
Yes, so the question was, I forgot to repeat the question just after you told me last time to repeat the question. Can UCU, as stakeholders of the scheme, have a vote of no confidence in the board? Yes, and we have at our National Congress. So we've called for the resignation of Bill Galvin, the Chief Executive. We did have a no confidence vote in the board, didn't we? Yeah, we've done all these kind of things. Very little effect, very little effect. The people who need to be making these statements and calling these things are the employers. They're doing almost the exact opposite of coming out with statements that are lukewarm, but say we have full confidence in the board. How they can have that confidence when we've got stories like the one developing around Jane Hutton, I've got no idea. But things would change very quickly if the employers said, we have no confidence in the way the scheme's being run. And so far, they're resisting it. The interesting thing is they'll say things in private that they won't say publicly. And that's disgraceful. Okay, very quick follow-up question, then I'll ask you.
So it's all about valuation and values going up and down of the assets. So Brexit is just around the corner. So how is that going to affect all this valuation? Because everywhere I just read that things will go down and things like that.
It's totally unclear. So the question is, how would something like Brexit affect the valuation? Totally unclear, because there may be a market crash. There may, but who knows what happens to things like the gilt rate? You can't tell until it happens because of the valuation methodology. Almost certainly. So there was the 2008 crash. The recovery was almost complete within a couple of years. So you got a dip and then you're through it. The thing about pension schemes is they're long term, and you shouldn't really be reacting to short term fluctuations. But time will tell on that one. No one knows what's going to happen with that one. I will come to Asha first because we've just had men speaking so far, and I didn't even see Asha down here. But you had a question.
Yeah. So it looks like USS are not listening to UCU or the JET proposals in terms of the recommendations. And it seems like the only people that might have power to do something is UK. So how can we put more pressure on the UK to actually speak out and do something before it all kind of kicks off again with industrial action? Yeah,
so Asha's question, it seems like the employers, Universities UK, have the power to do something. They seem to be the only people with the power to do something, and they're not using it. How can we make them use it? Well, me and the other negotiators can try negotiation. It's not having much effect. The difficult thing is this comes down to the willingness, I think, to take strike action again. Seems to be the only language they listen to. I was talking to someone who's a very experienced scheme actuary, been involved in lots of things. He was absolutely fuming at the fact that you can write as many papers as you want, use as much logic as you like, you can make a really clear-cut case. Nobody listens. He's often represented it's the employee side in things against employers or against trustee boards. Nobody listens until there's strike action, and then people start listening. And this has been a story all along with this one. I mean, we could have had a joint expert panel before the strike action, but Universities UK showed no interest. They didn't listen to the arguments we were making. They tried to fob it off as kind of crank stuff. We had to strike for a month just to get an independent report. And then when we got that independent report, it didn't get implemented. And what do our employers do? They sort of say, okay, well, maybe let's wait for the next report. The power is absolutely with the employers, which is why threatening strike action is absolutely the right thing. If they've got any sense, the threat of strike action should change things. I've got no idea why even the fact that we're balloting hasn't yet made them change their position. I mean, that should be enough, and yet it's not. Did you want to respond to that as a member? Was it a question? Yes. Okay. So can I take a question from Robin to address gender balance issues, and then I'll come back to whoever it was that had hands in the air over here and over here.
Well, I was going to say, I mean, you mentioned earlier that it's mysterious that the employer seems to be ignoring what's going on, but they seem to be actively doing it. If we learn anything from the Jane Hutton situation and what's going on with misrepresenting the pensions regulator, not only are they sort of burying their head in the sand, they seem to be actually explicitly withholding information, both David Eastwood and the UK. So my question is, what is the employer's motivation here? Because it doesn't just seem that they're trying to be cagey. It seems like they've got some, I don't want to sound like a conspiracy theorist, but that's where we're at.
Okay, so the question is, is it possible, this is rephrasing, but is it possible there are ulterior motives on behalf of the employers, given that not only are they ignoring what's going on, they seem to have a role in sort of trying to cover it up as well in terms of the Jane Hutton story and the like. Yeah, I mean, it's a really tricky situation in the sense of you've got individual employers around the country, Sheffield University, for example, who then are supposed to feed their views into this kind of umbrella body, Universities UK, who then is supposed to advocate on their behalf. And it's very similar to the structure we have within UCU, where individual branches get informed by the members of the branch. A branch forms a position, and then UCU nationally is supposed to form its policy based on that. We had problems in UCU a year ago with what would seem to be the national structures not being receptive to what was happening in branches. It's possible the same is going on within the employers' structures. Sheffield University being one example of an employer that's got really fed up and writing really strident things, but that isn't what the umbrella organisation Universities UK put forward. Who is deciding what Universities UK do? Not totally clear. There are various people. There's this Employers Pension Forum that I mentioned earlier. That's now Adam Tickell, Vice-Chancellor of Sussex, who chairs that. There's Alistair Jarvis, of course, at Universities UK, the Chief Executive. In case you haven't had enough of conspiracy theories or cronyism and the like, David Eastwood, who's chair of the USS board, who was mentioned as having sat on this email from the 8th of January, not shown it to Jane Hutton, etc. He was Vice-Chancellor of Birmingham at the same time that Adam Tickell, who's now chair of the Employers Pension Forum, was his deputy Vice-Chancellor, and Alistair Jarvis, who's the Chief Executive of Universities UK, was the press officer at Birmingham. So all three of those were working very closely together at Birmingham at one point. They've scattered in different directions, but you might understand why they're not jumping to criticise David Eastwood. But no, I try not to go down a conspiracy theory route where I don't have to, but it's really hard to understand the lack of action here by Universities UK through normal methods. Right, there was a question somewhere in the middle. Right. Oh no, it was you. Sorry. Right. Oh, great, thank you very much. That makes it easy. Sorry for not coming to you first. And then there was a question somewhere, or maybe they've left. I think it was someone on the end of that row who's left. Who else would like to ask a question? Yes, go for it.
You talked about UK having the power, but you talked earlier on as well about the regulator being very concerned. Is there any potential or likelihood that the regulator will make any further interventions or would have any influence to bring to bear here?
Yes, thank you. So the question is, I mentioned the regulator earlier. Are they likely to sort of continue to intervene? And I've already explained that they are most concerned about protecting the Pension Protection Fund. So they continually intervene in this story. They write letters quite a lot. There was one that was leaked from the middle of May that you can read, which did make clear that they are putting pressure on USS to go for a prudent valuation along the lines of the ones they've come out with. Now, my response to that is that the pensions regulator talks about being sort of evidence-based and the like. Here's what I think should have happened. When the Joint Expert Panel's report was published in September 2018, if USS was genuinely run in the interest of the stakeholders who said we support this report, what would have happened would have been the chief executive and his team would have assembled as much evidence as they could find to back up the findings of the report, which they would have been able to do in buckets. Based on the material that I have seen and the data that I have managed to get out of them, there are so many arguments that you could use backed up with evidence to say that this is a safe way to value the scheme and doesn't cause problems. They should have then gone to the board and said, here's a load of evidence supporting the Joint Expert Panel's report. We propose we accept the report. They should have then presented all that information to the regulator and said, here, you're an evidence-based regulator. Here's the evidence for why this is the right valuation. Okay, but they didn't, partly because Bill Galvin, who's the chief executive of USS, was formerly the chief executive of the pensions regulator. So here are all the other webs that all join up. And instead, they self-regulated. They're very happy to go along with what the regulator said when the regulator needed challenging on this one, because the regulation isn't designed for schemes like USS. The regulator will continue to intervene, but that's not a reason to say that we're doomed and we can't do anything here. I think precisely the opposite. The fact that this report should have been enough to be a game changer. It's got really distinguished people on the panel. There were submissions by people like Mervyn King and John Kay, sort of big names, basically advocating what we've been saying. This should have been a moment to start to shift and push the regulator back and say, no, enough. This is not the way for this scheme. And I think if that had been done properly, we'd be in a very different situation here. So that's my take on it. I did point at you before, so let's have a question.
I'm not sure how valid this comment is or question, but given that pensions are, as I understand it, deferred salary, under principles of natural justice, is it possible, or is the UCU looking into the question of the potential for pursuing a class action lawsuit against USS for malfeasance, negligence, whatever?
So the question is, is there a legal case that can be brought against USS to defend the position that we're in? Quite possibly. So there was during the strike, there was a group that was set up. They called themselves Academic for Pensions Justice. It involved academics from a law background who formed this group. There was crowdfunding, which raised, I forget, was it up to it was something like £50,000 or 20,000? I forget. There was quite a lot of money put in by ordinary scheme members. If you haven't yet donated to that cause and want to, you may still find a link that you can donate to. They've spent the intervening time preparing a legal case and consulting with an expert on this thing. And I don't know. I don't understand the processes. Maybe is there a barrister or a solicitor? Somebody's looking at a case and preparing a case. They will then have a case that is sort of assembled with the kind of, a proposal as to how likely it is to be successful. They won't have enough funding to sort of pursue that case in the courts because legal costs go up. So this branch sent a motion to UCU's Congress saying that UCU should support and keep open-minded to legal action, and then it was amended by a report from Leeds UCU, a motion from Leeds UCU that asked for a report into the feasibility of legal action, and it specifically mentioning this group that's already been doing the legwork. So people are looking into whether this is possible, and this is not an area that I know much about. There is some hope that there are various things that, it sounds like something's gone wrong. there is some hope that there could be an avenue along those grounds. But my view is everything needs to be thrown at this. And again, it's not a reason to say, well, you know, maybe the legal action will do it and the Joint Expert Panel report will do it. We can't count on things like that, I don't think, to stop this from happening. Going back to the comments I made earlier, the only sign that the people take notice of and wake up to is when people threaten to walk away from their jobs, which is really disappointing. But yeah, all of those avenues are being pursued. Yes, sorry. All right, good.
So, a valuation which has been pushed back into a post-Brexit sort of a valuation which is going to take place post-Brexit,
right,
where we expect to wobble in the market. Could that, yes or no, could this be used to fuel nefarious rhetoric to, you know, to sort of, you know, advocate for giving us the worst possible deal?
Right, yes, I have to repeat your question before I say yes or no. Could a March 2020 valuation taking place in a post-Brexit apocalypse be used as, I think, what did you say, nefarious rhetoric, yeah, to say the scheme is in big trouble? Yes, if you want a yes-no answer, yes, it could. Yeah. Right, is that the right time? Is it 1:52? I'll take 2 more questions, say, and then we should probably call it a day. Yes, question at the back.
How could what's happening at Trinity College affect all of this?
Okay, question is, how could what's happening at Trinity College affect all of this? Yes, I didn't mention Trinity at all. Trinity College have decided to leave the scheme. Now, Trinity is an odd case because they've got a very small number of employees in the scheme. I think there's only 20 or 30 actually employed by the college, and they've got over £1 billion worth of assets, of wealth. They can pay something like £30 million to exit the scheme, which you could argue is a huge waste of money. They say it's rational because it totally gets rid of the existential risk, even though it's, you know, tiny, of their assets being used to bail out the scheme. Now, the question is what effect that has on the scheme. USS have said Trinity leaving doesn't have an effect. If one more employer of a similar kind with sort of large numbers of assets, small numbers of employees, there are some other Oxbridge colleges in this boat, only a handful, but there are some, leaves, that could downgrade the assessment of the scheme's covenant. If that happens, the pensions regulator would insist on lower investment risk being taken by the scheme, and that would drive up costs. So what's happening? Well, there was an attempt to try and get the fellows of Trinity College to overturn their council's decision. That failed. More fellows voted in favour of upholding the decision of council than voted against it. UCU have called a boycott of Trinity College. We're not totally clear on precisely what's involved in that, although it would be most of the usual things, you know, not going there, not doing work for them, etc., etc. That has a big effect on Trinity because a lot of their teaching is done by people who are employed by Cambridge University and not by the college directly, and they can say, no, we're not prepared to teach. So yeah, the Trinity College situation, on the one hand, is almost irrelevant. On the other hand, is kind of a flashpoint. USS are also saying that there needs to be a rule change to more tightly bind employers to the scheme. Now, some people are saying, well, surely the union would support such a thing. The union's position isn't totally decided yet because there are arguments both ways. If this was a move that had come from the employer body saying, we as an employer body want to make sure we're all bound closer to the scheme and no one leaves, sounds like a good idea. If it's USS tightening their grip on the scheme, given the people who are at USS, it's not so clear cut. And that may well be a point that scuppers this option 3 solution anyway. That comes with a rule change to prevent people leaving, and also USS want closer monitoring on the amount of debt that universities are generating, the amount of borrowing that they're taking. Those 2 things together may actually mean that this option 3 solution comes apart anyway. So yeah, good question, and I hope that's part of an answer. One more question. Did anybody have another question? Or? Oh, good. Well, maybe we've got to the end. Right, so thank you very much. Watch this space, basically. There's a lot happening very quickly. We'll do our best within UCU to try and push things. We don't want to strike. Of course, we don't want to strike. But if we're pushed that far, I think we have to be prepared to do it. OK, thanks very much.